focus on how we can help institutions with really building out plans that can support their continuous engagement strategies on omni-channel communication platforms. As we get past the May 1 timeframe of institutions who are looking at those numbers and thinking through their strategies, it's a really good opportunity to kind of evaluate where we are with our plans and where we are with our goals, and then think to ourselves, what can we do to get to where we need to be between now and the fall, right? Because we know that May 1 might be a good mile marker for our enrollment in our class, but we also know that there's going to be some gaps here and there, whether it be specific programs or missing our deposit numbers, or making sure that we keep the students that we've gotten commitments from in our enrollment funnel, right? So as we go through the presentation today, what we're going to do is try to get through the content in 20 minutes or less, and then open up for any questions and answers. But what we're going to do is kind of give a brief overview of the state of student engagement and impacts on conversion and yield, right? What are some of the changes that are going on in the space that are making it harder for institutions to really triangulate around what their actual number is going to be around May 1st. I was on a call yesterday with a partner institution of ours where they were talking about, last year, what happened was they up until May 1st, they were up in applications, they were up in deposits, they were up in visits, they were up in evaluations of visits. Everything seemed great. And then on May 2nd rolled around, they were 4% behind where they wanted to be. So, we worked with them to put together a plan for how do we avoid that going forward. Then we're going to talk about 4 key strategies for immediate impact. We have some great examples of institutions who are leveraging online engagement to support conversion and yield at each step of the process. And we're going to open it up for questions and answers. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So if you have any questions on those platforms, feel free to post them and we'll answer them towards the end of the presentation as we go. So to get us started, and as we're thinking about the recruitment process, and we've shared this story on a couple of different webcasts, so pardon if I'm repeating some things we've said in the past, but when we think about the enrollment process, we know that things have changed, right? 15, 20 years ago, results in our funnel were somewhat predictive in a lot of ways. There were a small number of data providers that we would use to get our lists of our prospect pools. Maybe we would do some travel. And then ultimately we would know if we needed to grow our class by X%, we could buy more names, we could travel more, we could do those sorts of things. And the numbers would kind of flow using those conversions, give or take a few percentage points throughout the bottom of the funnel. What we know now is that over time, search has evolved, right? The way students and schools connect has changed. There are data providers, the ACTs, NRCCUAs, college boards of the world out there that are providing, lists of test takers and survey takers and those sorts of things. We're doing things like travel, but now what we've done is we've added in things like digital marketing, social media, display advertising, common application, all those sorts of things at the top of the funnel that really make it a little bit more complicated when trying to think about how we're going about building and shaping our class. Even things like CRM systems, whether it's TargetX or Slate or whatever system you might be using, have come on to automate a lot of these processes. But at the end of the day, we know, based on data from the U.S. Department of Education, that the number of applications that institutions have to generate for one single enrollment has doubled over the past 15 years. So what this effectively says is that our admissions counseling staffs are doing double the amount of work for the same net result as they were 15 years ago. And that's not sustainable when it comes to the amount of effort and work that needs to get put into recruitment. So we know that things need to evolve, things need to change, whether it's analytics and communications and measuring of outcomes. There are things that we need to do to really evolve that process. On the student side, we also know that the way students in schools the students engage with school content has evolved as well, right? 7 out of 10 students watch videos from colleges. That number is, trending upwards. We read an article last week that it was closer to 97% of students who are watching videos from colleges. So, video is a preferred medium for today's student audience, whether you're talking about millennials for grad programs or Gen Z for undergrad. The video is just a part of their life and part of their process. They're on YouTube, they're on Netflix, they're on, Disney Plus when that comes out. Those sorts of things are all native means of communication and consuming content for students. We also know that EDU branded content is amongst the most trusted source of college information. So students do value the content that's on your website. They value the print brochures and materials they receive when it's appropriate in the process for them, because they know that what's going to happen for them is what they get from that content is official and factual information. They may use college search and review sites to shop and compare and do some side-by-side comparisons of campus life and those sorts of things. But we also know that they go to your website for official information, application deadlines, all of the information they need to get through the process. And the final piece that we know from students is that current students and counselors are rated amongst the most influential connections when we talk about engaging with the campus population. And this makes sense from a prospective student perspective, that current students share that voice of real life on campus. Counselors in many ways are the people who make things happen for prospective students, whether it's helping them through the application process, answering those questions, being their advisor and support through the process, being their champion for scholarship committees. Those sorts of things are all things that admissions counselors do for students. So what this says to us is that the admissions business is still a people business. It always has been and always will be. What's changed is the way that those connections happen and the way that students connect with institutions. So what we've done here at Platform Q is develop Conduit, which is our platform that kind of takes those three truths, the video content, the institutional branded content, the voice of the student and counselor, and makes them all easily accessible and immediately available on a single unified platform. And the reason why we share this is when we think about the common challenges that are impacting conversion and yield, we know that there are things like demographic shifts that in many markets that are making it harder for institutions to fill their class with traditional undergraduate students. There's mandates to use new approaches, but constrained budgets at the same time. So it's always that kind of challenge of having to do more with less, facing that increased competition, while also addressing changes in the use of technology, reaching new populations of students. You have more students that have higher need that might be identified in your prospect pool. So there's all these different aspects of engaging students that many higher ed institutions are facing. So when we think about working with partner institutions and how we build out a strategy, what we do with Conduit is really develop a continuous and consistent omni-channel student engagement plan, which is a combination of that institutional branded content available on desktop, mobile, and social, like you're watching this presentation now, that's available on our Conduit platform as well as all of our social channels, real-time engagement with live chat, but it's also promoted via email, text, and also connected to a broader plan that's aligned with your overall enrollment strategies. So when you think about your on-campus events, your regional events, your deadlines, what are you doing to fill the gaps in a lot of those plans? So the purpose of today's discussion and presentation is to walk through how some leading institutions are really working to reach every audience at every phase of the process on every device and platform with high impact content that supports conversion and yield. Whether we're talking about earlier in the process, which is things like information sessions and application workshops, or things that are going to impact yield today, parent engagement, orientation and pre-arrival content, online admitted student events, transfer student outreach. These are all things that we should be thinking about when we're talking about bridging our enrollment gaps and how we're going to bring more students to our institution or keep the students that we have so they don't melt away and potentially go somewhere else. And finally, when we think, before we get into some of the key strategies, when we think about making all of this happen, for institutions that partner with Platform Q Education, we encourage you to think about doing what you do best, which is representing your brand, telling your story, answering student questions, being that person-to-person kind of connection to help students through the process, and allow us to do the rest. We know when institutions, one of the biggest and hardest parts of building a solid online engagement plan is really that marketing and engagement support to really drive the student attendance and drive the student outreach. So setting up of the social channels, setting up of the email and text campaigns for live events. That's where our team can kind of step in and support. So we encourage you to think about reaching out to your engagement marketing strategist to set up some of those programs. So now the last 10 minutes or so of time, I want to go into 4 key strategies that we've identified for institutions to get the most out of their recruitment campaign and really drive the best results when we talk about getting to that past the May 1st mile marker. I won't call it a finish line, but we'll call it the mile marker to enrollment on campus, to census date, to when you've got all the butts on seats and heads on pillows to reach this class, and then start working on the next, right? So the first is, minimizing melt with pre-arrival and pre-orientation content. When we think about that gap between when a student puts in their enrollment deposit, when they come to campus for orientation and then finally move in on campus, there's a lot of time in there for students to kind of second guess themselves, get a little nervous about the process. So, one example of this is Azusa Pacific University, and this is a focused on international students, but this is very transferable to traditional on-campus domestic undergrad outreach as well. What they did is they put together a pre-orientation and pre-arrival program that was meant to reach and engage their international students before they come to campus. Their international population only has one orientation. So there's a lot of time between submitting their deposit, then having to handle a lot of paperwork, do a lot of planning and support. So they knew that students needed that support through that process. They found that nearly half of their enrolled international students came through the Conduit platform between the enrollment decision and actually arriving on campus, which moved a lot. And by moving a lot of their communications workshops earlier in the cycle, they were able to get students committed earlier in the process, which is critical and important. So if you think about this from a traditional domestic undergraduate recruitment perspective, it's really not that different, right? You take that content, everything you need to know heading into orientation, that fills the gap between deposit and orientation. Everything you need to remember from orientation fills the gap between orientation and move-in. And then pre-arrival, everything you need for move-in day. Having this type of content, not just checklists on a website, but having a live person available to tell the story, to tell the content, and then be available to answer questions. The next would be amplifying your message with social media streaming. And this is what I've talked a little bit about. What we're doing here today is, with the Conduit platform specifically, you can stream your content to desktop branded experience. It's available also on mobile, but you can also take that content and simulcast it to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So there's the opportunity to take that content and make it available and accessible to not only students who may miss an email or may decide not to click a text, right? It doesn't matter where a student consumes your content and engages with you when you're trying to distribute video content. It's that they engage with your content. So while it's great if they consume your content in the Conduit platform, because you get all of the tracking and all of the ability to know which students engage with your content, it doesn't hurt your efforts to stream that content to social media so that parents can consume it. If it's an application workshop early in the process, maybe guidance counselors who follow your page, there's opportunities for engaging students across all of the different platforms and channels. So a couple examples of this, Landmark College earlier in the cycle, we've got kind of three main examples of, kind of a top of the funnel strategy, a yield strategy, and then a melt strategy with social media streaming. So Landmark College, they interviewed a topical best-selling author who was joined on a panel by a Landmark College alum. They reached 1,600 viewers with their Facebook Live content alone. And so this was able to cast a much wider net that engaged obviously some alumni and parents as well. But this was a great way for them to get eyeballs on the content that they wanted to reach a much broader audience than just one specific group of prospective students. The next school we looked at is Stony Brook University. So Stony Brook took their admitted student, their incoming first-year students webcast, simulcasted to Facebook Live, and they reached 2,500 additional viewers. And this was a combination of students and parents. And when we think about the recruitment process, parents are a huge part of this, right? So when we think about kind of cornerstone events that are needed to ensure that you have a consistent online engagement plan, a parent-focused program is definitely one of those, and including parents in programs that they're going to be interested in. Financial aid and scholarships, student panels are all great programs for parents who are key influencers in the process. And the final group was Umkc, so University of Missouri, Kansas City. They actually took their presentation of their pre-orientation program. So they had orientation leaders who were getting ready to have students come to campus for on-campus orientation, and they did a pre-orientation Q&A. The event was about 25 minutes or so, and they reached 1,000 viewers on, again, their Facebook Live channel on top of the students who passed through the Conduit platform directly, right? So great way to make sure that they were visible, available, and accessible to this audience. So that's on the social piece. The next is really on, for the third of our four is, shifting emphasis to transfer student engagement. When we think about ways to bridge, our enrollment gaps and ways to, really fix our funnel, if you're short on your first year student population now, chances are you're not going to find 30, 40, 50 prospective international students late in the process, or first year students this late in the process. But transfer students are a great population to try to focus on, to say, there's an opportunity for those students to finish what they started. And we all know that there are many benefits to recruiting transfer students to our institution. They fill upper level classes where there might be capacity. From a cost perspective, oftentimes there's less investment in education because they're taking on some of those those upper level courses. Discount rate is oftentimes lower for transfer students. There's a number of business elements on top of the fact that you're providing students with that opportunity to finish a bachelor's degree and get prepared for that next step in their career, right? So when we think about a sound strategy for this, another Missouri school, University of Missouri St. Louis, developed a transfer student outreach program on their Conduit platform, focusing on having dedicated presentations that were focused on supporting students through the process, answering questions about transfer credit evaluations and that whole process, and then also hosting weekly chats on their platform and on their website to maximize reach and engagement so that their team is consistently available and consistently accessible to answer student questions throughout that process. And number four, and this is our last one for this presentation before we open up for any questions, is getting started on a stronger overall plan for 2020 and beyond, right? If we think about where we are in this process, you can only squeeze so much water out of a rock for first year students. If you do all the work you need to do for transfer students and make sure that your national students enroll, you're gonna be where you're going to be, and hopefully it's close to your goal, and you're in a position where you have a healthy institution. So now it's important to kind of take a step back and say, what are some of the things that we can do differently so we're not in this position next year, right? So when we think about that, part of that is layering of strategies, right? In higher ed, we are really good at adding things to our suite of things that we use for outreach. We're not so good at necessarily taking things away, but we are good at reallocating some of those things to different places in the process, right? So, if you were to think about your enrollment process, you didn't stop sending letters when you started sending emails. You didn't stop sending emails when you started doing digital advertising, right? What you did was you adjusted kind of the cadence of some of those communications, and you also adjusted kind of where they were in the process, right? The same thing goes with developing an online engagement plan and incorporating that into a process. So if we think about the overall enrollment process from prospect to enrolled student, there are some things that are and should be standard operating procedure. Things like search engine optimization, digital advertising. Obviously, we have email plans and direct mail plans and some phone call programs and those sorts of things. So when you think about layering of these strategies, layering webcasting and social streaming and live online chats are just another way to boost conversion and yield at each phase of the process. So when we think about kind of these outcomes, we look at, what can we do to get more inquiries to apply? What can we do to get more applicants to complete their application? And then what can we do to get more of those students who have indicated an interest and applied to actually enroll at the institution, right? And we know when we think about this layering approach, when we align online engagement with overall enrollment priorities, we see boosts in conversion and yield at each phase of the process. We looked at the data with many of our partner institutions, and we saw that when we're aligned with overall enrollment plans and the online engagement plan is done and executed well, 35% boost in inquiry to app conversion, 26% boost in app completion, and 7% boost in inquiry through enrollment yield. And if you could say you could boost those numbers by even a couple of percentage points, that could mean really hitting and missing your class as an institution. So hopefully some of these ideas are helpful when we think about the overall process, minimizing your melt with pre-arrival and orientation content, leveraging social media streaming to engage your audience and engage their influencers, shifting the emphasis to your transfer student engagement, and then finally getting a head start on 2020 with your overall planning. These are some of our ideas. We'd love to hear some of yours. If you're watching this on a social media channel, feel free to share your thoughts and ideas. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Once again, we thank you for joining us today. I have a couple of questions that are on our platform, and then we'll end the live broadcast and keep the conversation going on social media. So the one question I have from Mark is, how long does it take to set up one of these platforms for online engagement? That's a great question, Mark. The fastest we've seen it done is from signing on for partnership and actually executing a first event is 13 days. And that just happened recently, right? This is a time of year where we know that there's immediate needs for transfer student outreach programs, pre-orientation programs, things you probably have a lot of the content together for already. So it's easier to pull that side together. So then it's building out the platform and then hosting the event and hosting and promoting the event, which our team again supports with. So 13 days is the fastest. I would say that, there's that anything faster than that and you run into issues with being able to market your program effectively. So I wouldn't want you to go any earlier than that, but that's the general time frame. And then what I would say is that's for short-term, quick fix needs. What our team does is builds out a more robust strategy that actually includes, tent pole type events that keep your students engaged throughout the process versus kind of setting up one-off events to support better outcomes. So hopefully that helps. Looks like we have a question from Mary. Mary asked about reporting and being able to connect to CRMs. That's a great question. So Mary's asking about how do we get engagement data from Conduit into your CRM, right? Whether you're using TargetX or Slate or Lucian or whatever it is, right? We have a feature called Crm Bridge that allows you to take your audience that you've identified. Let's say it's a admitted student enrolling student orientation program, right? You know who your enrolling students are. So you'd identify that list. All you need to promote an online event is first name, last name, email, and cell phone if you have opt-in for text messaging promotion. If you include in that record their unique identifier from the CRM, whether it's their Slate ID or their Salesforce ID, whatever it is, when we do the marketing and promotion or when you do it through the platform yourself, that unique identifier stays with that student's record throughout their program. So then after you host a live event or in your weekly reporting or monthly reporting, whatever reports you use to track your outcomes on our platform, that identifier is then tied to that student's record and able to be loaded back into your CRM. So you're not creating duplicate records. So Conduit really does well with kind of living off to the side of the CRM, but making sure that anything that happens within the platform itself can get tied back in so that it can inform your follow-up communications, inform models, all those sorts of things as part of that process. So it looks like we're a little over time, so I'm gonna end the presentation here. If you have any questions, please reach out on any of our social channels. Find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Platform Q Education. We're happy to continue the conversation. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.